My name is Patrice Holt. I'm 39. I work in insurance claims, which means I spend my professional life distinguishing between what actually happened and what people say happened. I am not a credulous person. I have never been. My mother used to say I was born skeptical, that I came out of the womb already asking for documentation. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand who is telling you what I'm about to tell you. We moved into the Dennison house in July of 2018. My husband Aaron, my son Devlin, who was 11, and me. The house was in a rural section of Licking County, Ohio. Not farm country exactly, more the transitional land between the farming districts and the Columbus exurbs. The kind of geography that hasn't decided what it is yet. The house sat on 2.5 acres and was surrounded on 3 sides by second-growth woods. The kind of woods that have grown up over what was once cleared land. Young enough that the trees aren't large, but dense enough that you can't see more than 30 feet into them. The house was built in 1941. Rectangular, simple, 2 stories. The no-frills construction of a wartime era that didn't have material to waste on decoration. White aluminum siding over the original wood clapboard. 4 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a full basement, an attached garage. It had been on the market for 14 months, which is why we could afford it. In a market where anything livable in the Columbus orbit was going in 4 days. 14 months meant something. I knew that when we bought it. I told myself it was the rural location, the small town school district, the fact that the siding needed replacing. I told myself those things, and I believed them because I wanted to. The real estate agent, a woman named Donna, who I found out later, had declined to show the house to 2 prior families before us. Said nothing to us that we later felt was dishonest. She said nothing. That was, in retrospect, its own kind of dishonesty. The first 6 weeks were fine. Summer in a new house with a kid, the specific logistics of unpacking and setting up and finding where things are. Devlin had his room on the 2nd floor, the east bedroom, the one with the window that looked toward the backwoods. He settled in. He was 11, he had his video games and his books, and he was fine. The first thing I noticed wasn't frightening, it was odd. It was the kind of odd you file and forget. I was in the kitchen on a Saturday morning in August, making coffee, and I heard Devlin on the stairs. The specific sound of him on the stairs. He was a heavy-footed kid. He'd never learned to come downstairs quietly. And I knew his step the way you know your child's specific sounds. But the footsteps stopped on the stairs, and then I heard him, clearly in his bedroom above me. His bedroom directly above the kitchen. He was in his bedroom and moving around in there. But the footsteps had stopped on the stairs, which meant whatever had been on the stairs was not Devlin. I went to the foot of the stairs. Empty. I went up to Devlin's room. He was sitting on his bed reading, hadn't been downstairs, said he'd been in his room for an hour. I went back downstairs. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment and I told myself it was the house. Old houses make sounds. The specific sounds of an old house can, under certain conditions of temperature and fatigue, organize themselves into patterns that the brain resolves as footsteps. This is documented, this is real. I applied it and I moved on. But I made a note of it in the way I make notes in my professional life. Not written down, filed mentally, cross-referenced with what comes next. Because in claims work, the first anomaly is never the whole story. The second thing happened 3 weeks later. Mid-September, a Wednesday night. Aaron was asleep and I was up late with a work deadline at the kitchen table with my laptop at 11:30. The kitchen window faced the backyard and the woods behind it. The motion-sensing floodlight we'd installed over the back door was mounted above the window, and when it triggered, it lit the backyard brightly enough to see clearly. At 11:40, it triggered. I looked up from my laptop. The backyard in the floodlight. The grass, the tree line, the fire pit Aaron had built. And at the tree line, just inside the edge of the woods where the light reached its limit, something. I'm going to be precise. I could see it clearly enough to see the following. It was standing upright. It was tall, taller than a person, in a way that I registered before I'd processed it consciously, the way height registers before measurement. It was thin, it was pale. It was standing at the tree line, looking at the house. The floodlight is on a 60-second timer. I sat at the kitchen table and I watched for the full 60 seconds. It did not move. It stood at the tree line in the floodlight and it looked at the house, and it did not move. The light went off. The backyard was dark. I sat in the kitchen, and I did not move either for about 2 minutes. Then I got up and I turned on the exterior light over the back door, which is a standard porch light, and I looked out the window. The tree line was empty. I went to bed. I did not sleep. I did not tell Aaron what I had seen. October. Here is where the accumulation begins in earnest, and I'm going to give it to you in the specific sequence because the sequence matters. October 4th. Devlin told us at breakfast that there was someone outside his window at night. His window was on the second floor. He said he'd seen it twice. A shape outside his window in the dark. Second floor. The window looks east toward the backwoods. I asked him to describe it. He said it was tall and pale, and it looked like a person, but it was too tall to be standing on the ground at the second floor window. And there was nothing outside his window to stand on. He said it was just there, outside the glass, looking in. I asked him how long. He said since August. Since August. The same week as the footsteps on the stairs. My 11-year-old had been seeing something outside his second floor window. Since August. And had not told us because he said he thought we would think he was making it up. I went outside that morning and I stood beneath Devlin's window and I looked at the siding. The ground beneath the window was soft enough, we'd had rain, to show marks. I found 2 impressions in the soil beneath the window. They were not boot prints. They were not the round prints of an animal. They were the elongated impressions of 2 narrow vertical forms standing in the soft soil beneath the second floor window. The impressions of something that had been standing there with enough weight and duration to press into the ground. October 9th. Aaron saw it. He was taking the dog out at 6 a.m. We had a shepherd mix named Bo. And Bo stopped at the edge of the yard. The specific locked muscle stop of a dog that has found something it will not approach. Aaron looked toward the tree line, and it was there, standing at the edge of the woods in the early morning, in the flat gray light of an October dawn. He described it to me later. Very tall, very pale, thin in a way that was not the thinness of a person, but something closer to a form that it had been extended like a proportional figure, stretched vertically. He said its arms were wrong. He said the arms hung lower than arms should hang. He said, it looked at me and I felt that it was deciding something. I had heard this before without knowing it. Derek's exact words in a different account. I will not go into now. The deciding quality. More than one person has described it. Aaron went inside and got his phone to photograph it, and when he came back, it was gone, and Bo would not go near the tree line for the rest of the day. October 14th. The basement. I want to tell you about the basement specifically, because the basement is where it became impossible to file and move on. I was doing laundry on a Monday afternoon. The washer and dryer were in the northeast corner of the basement. I had been down there twice that day already without incident. The basement was an unfinished space, concrete floor, exposed joists above, the furnace and water heater and the laundry area, one window on the east wall, ground level, that looked out at the side yard. Standard basement. I was moving a load from the washer to the dryer at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I heard The breathing. It was coming from the northeast corner of the basement, from the section behind the water heater where the space between the water heater and the east wall was narrow and dark. Breathing. Low, slow breathing. The specific rhythm of something large. Breathing slowly. The sound of a respiratory system considerably larger than a human's moving air at a rate considerably lower than a human rate. I stood at the dryer and I did not move. The breathing continued. Slow. Regular. The sound of something that was not asleep. The rhythm too deliberate, too even for sleep, but of something that was very still and breathing very slowly. The sound of something that knew I was there and was waiting. I left the laundry and I went upstairs, and I did not go back down until Aaron came home. We went down together. The northeast corner was empty. The water heater, the exposed wall, the concrete floor. No marks, no evidence, nothing. But the smell was there. In that corner specifically, a smell I had been noticing in the house for weeks and had attributed to the age of the structure, to the basement moisture. Standing in that corner with Aaron, I understood that it was not a building smell. It was an animal smell. The specific dense, warm smell of a warm-blooded body in an enclosed space. The smell of something that had been in that corner, that came back to that corner, that used that corner. November 2nd. This is the night I am most careful about when I tell this account, because this is the night that closed every exit I had. It was a Friday. Aaron was in Cleveland for work. Back the next morning. Devlin was in bed. I was watching television in the living room at 10 p.m., the specific distracted watching of a person whose mind is elsewhere. I had been sleeping badly for a month. I was tired in the specific way of sustained, insufficient sleep. At 10:15, I heard Devlin scream. It was not a nightmare scream. It was not the half-asleep cry of a child having a bad dream. It was a fully awake, fully present scream of the kind I had never heard from my child in 11 years. A scream that my body responded to before my mind had processed it, and I was off the couch and up the stairs before I had consciously decided to move. I got to Devlin's door and I opened it, and I will tell you what I saw. Devlin was in his bed, pressed against the headboard as far from the window as the bed allowed. He was awake, and he was looking at the window, and he was making the sound that comes after a scream, the sound that happens when the lungs are empty and trying to refill, the specific gasping of genuine terror. At the window, his east window, the second floor window above the side yard, with the two impressions in the soil beneath it. At the window, the thing was outside, not standing below the window, at the window, his face at the glass, looking in. The window was lit from inside by Devlin's nightlight, and from outside by nothing. It was a dark November night, no moon, and the thing's face at the glass was lit from the room's light on the interior surface of the glass, which means I saw it in the specific way you see a face pressed close to a lit window from outside, which is partially the features catching the light unevenly, the glass between us. I am going to tell you what I saw, and I'm going to tell it in the clinical language I have spent my professional life using, because it is the only language I have that I can control right now. The face at the glass was too large for a human face in the specific proportion of a face that has been scaled up rather than distorted. The features in roughly the right relationship to each other, but everything larger than it should be. The eyes dark, not dark irised, dark, the full eye dark, the specific flat dark of eyes, with no visible sclera, no differentiation between iris and pupil. The skin pale, not skin pale, the pale of something that does not reflect light in the way skin reflects light, the pale of a surface with no warmth in it. It was looking at Devlin, and then it looked at me. I do not have adequate language for what it felt like to be looked at by it. What I can tell you is that it was specific, not the general animal awareness of a creature that has registered a new presence. It was specific recognition. It looked at me the way you look at a person you know and have been watching for a while and are now acknowledging directly. Then it was gone. Not moved away, gone. The window empty. The night outside ordinary. I got Devlin out of the house at 11 p.m. that night. We drove to my sister's in Columbus and we stayed there for a week. And I called Aaron and told him everything on the phone at 1 a.m. sitting in my sister's kitchen. He drove back from Cleveland at 5 a.m. We did not go back for our things. A moving company cleared the house. We found out later, from the county records office, from an old neighbor who'd lived on Bella Road her whole life, that the Dennison house had had 9 families in 30 years. 9. That the original owners, the Dennison family themselves, had left in the winter of 1958, and that the patriarch, Harold Dennison, had filed a report with the county sheriff's office that year that the county clerk described to me as, quote, too disturbing to summarize over the phone. I requested the report. It took 2 months. When it arrived, I sat at my kitchen table in Columbus and I read it. Harold Dennison's report, filed December 1958, described something living in the woods behind the house, something that had been there since they moved in 1941, something that came to the tree line at night, something that had pressed its face to his son's bedroom window, his son's bedroom, the east bedroom, second floor, the same window 60 years later, the same window. I have the report. I have kept it because I don't know what else to do with it, and because I feel that it is evidence of something that should be documented. I don't know what it is evidence of exactly. I know that whatever was in those woods behind the Dennison house was there in 1941 and was there in 2018 and is probably there now. The new owners, a young couple, I looked it up, moved in 8 months ago. I have thought about calling them. I haven't yet. I don't know what I would say. I know what Harold Dennison should have said to the family after him. I know because nobody said it to me. I know it would have saved my son from a November night that I can still hear every time I'm in a dark room. The sound of his breathing before he could scream. The silence of a child who has used up all the air in their lungs and is trying to get more. What I would say, if I could say it, is this. The east bedroom window. Keep it covered. Don't let your kids sleep in that room. Don't go into the northeast corner of the basement. Don't go into the backyard after dark. And when the motion light triggers and you look out and see something at the tree line, don't wait to see if it moves. It won't move. It's already decided it doesn't need to. My name is Andrew Foss. I'm 31. I'm a graduate student, or I was, in the fall of 2021 when this happened, doing my doctoral work in musicology at a university in upstate New York. I say this because it's relevant to what I'm going to tell you. I was living alone. I was in an old house in a small town with very little social contact outside the department and a schedule that kept me up until 2 or 3 in the morning most nights. I know what isolation does to perception. I factored that in at every point. I am still telling you this. The house was a rental, a 3-bedroom Victorian on the edge of a small town called Cresswell, about 12 miles from the university. I had it alone because it was cheap and because the landlord, a taciturn man named Pete Garfield, who seemed to find the specifics of his own property uncomfortable to discuss, was renting it at $800 a month for reasons he did not explain and which I did not press. $800 a month for a 3-bedroom Victorian with a study and a full attic and a covered porch in upstate New York in 2021 should have been the first question I asked. I moved in on September 1st. The house was beautiful, in the specific way that houses built with care in 1889 are beautiful, and the woodwork, the plaster medallions on the ceilings, the original hardware on every door, the wide plank floors. I had the full house to myself, and I set up my work in the large front bedroom, used the second bedroom as a study, and left the third bedroom at the back of the second floor, the one that looked onto the backyard and the field beyond it, unused. I did not have a specific reason for not using the back bedroom. It was the last room I looked at during the walkthrough, and I did not like the feeling of it, and I chose one of the other rooms. I filed this preference as aesthetic and did not think more about it. The study was where I spent most of my time, evenings and deep into the night, reading and writing. The specific monastic isolation of doctoral work that has consumed your entire life. I was used to the sounds of the house within a week, the specific vocabulary of a 130-year-old building, the floor joists and the wind in the old windows and the plumbing in the furnace. I knew every sound the house made by the second week. I cataloged them the way you catalog anything you need to not be afraid of. The first thing was sound. The middle of October, a Thursday night, approximately 1 a.m, I was in the study and I heard movement in the back bedroom. I want to be specific about what I mean by movement, not the sound of the structure, not the furnace or the pipes. The specific sound of weight moving on the wide plank floors of the back bedroom. The unmistakable sound of something walking in the room at the back of the second floor. The room I was not using crossing from one side to the other. I went into the hall. I stood outside the back bedroom door. The sound had stopped. I opened the door. The room was empty. The single bed frame I'd put in there. The window overlooking the back field. The closet door standing open on the empty closet. Empty. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The room had a quality I cannot name better than recently vacated. The specific feeling of a space from which something has just withdrawn. Like walking into a room immediately after someone has left it. The air hasn't resettled yet. That quality in the back bedroom, in the empty house, at 1 a.m. I closed the door and went back to work. The second thing was the recordings. I was recording my piano work and I play. It was part of my research. I had a digital recorder I used to capture my own work for transcription. Standard voice recorder, the kind that runs on a continuous loop and overwrites itself every 24 hours. I had it running most evenings on my desk while I worked, occasionally catching my playing in the study where I'd set up a small keyboard. 3 weeks into October, I was reviewing a recording of some playing from the previous evening, and I heard very clearly under my own piano work, a voice. Low. A woman's voice. Low enough that I'd missed it the first time through. I slowed the recording down. She was talking, not to me. The voice wasn't directed at the recorder. It was the sound of someone talking to themselves, or to someone else in the room. A continuous low murmur. I could not make out specific words. The rhythm of the murmur was specific. It was not random speech. It had the cadence of someone reciting something, the specific rhythm of repeated language, something memorized and being repeated. A prayer, maybe, or something else repeated until it becomes automatic. I checked every room in the house. I was alone. I had been alone. I listened to the recording 6 times. The voice was present for approximately 4 minutes of continuous low murmur underneath my playing, beginning at 11:47 p.m. and ending at 11:51. 4 minutes. I called Pete Garfield the next morning and asked him if anyone had lived in the house recently. He said the house had been vacant for 3 years. I asked him if the house had a history I should know about. There was a pause. He said, "You're a grown man, Mr. Foss. What kind of history are you asking about?" I told him what I'd recorded. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, The woman who owned that house before me died in it. In the back bedroom, about 15 years ago, she was there for a while before anyone found her. I asked how long. He said he didn't know exactly. He said the estimates he had heard ranged from 2 weeks to a month. I thanked him and hung up. The back bedroom? The room with the quality of recent vacancy? The room I had not used from the first day without being able to say why. I went to the back bedroom and opened the door. The smell hit me immediately. I had noticed it before. A faint sweetness, organic, which I had attributed to the age of the house, to the particular chemistry of a room that didn't get enough ventilation. Standing in the doorway with the context Pete had just given me, I understood that it was not a building smell. It was the specific smell that I will not describe more precisely than this. The smell that lingers in a space where something organic has been for a long time in a warm climate. The smell of a room where someone spent their last weeks. I stood in the doorway and I did not go in. I went back to the study and I sat at my desk and I thought for a long time. And then I made the mistake of staying. I want to be honest about why I stayed. I stayed because I was a doctoral student on a stipend, and the rent was $800, and I had 4 months left on my lease and no money to break it. I stayed for practical reasons. I want that on record because the alternative explanation that something in the house was keeping me there is one I have considered and one I cannot rule out and one I am not prepared to accept. I stayed. The second month, November, was different. The recordings, I kept making recordings. I'm a researcher. I document things, began to change. The voice was present on more nights, sometimes for longer, sometimes in a different register. And in the second week of November, I recorded something that was not the voice. It was during a session at about midnight. I was playing and I stopped mid-piece because I heard something in the hallway. I sat at the keyboard and I listened. I did not play. The recorder was running. On the playback, in the silence where I had stopped playing, I heard the back bedroom door open. The specific sound of that door, the old latch mechanism of a 130-year-old door, the sound I knew from having opened it myself, opening from the inside, and then footsteps in the hall, the wide plank floor of the upstairs hall, recording clearly on the device. The footsteps moving from the back bedroom door toward the study, toward where I was sitting. I had heard nothing in the moment. I had been sitting at the keyboard listening, and I had heard nothing. The recorder had heard the door and the footsteps. I sat with the playback for a long time, running it back, running it forward. The door, the footsteps, the specific sound of something that had been in the back bedroom coming out of it and walking toward the room where I was. I went through the rest of that recording. 20 minutes of silence after the footsteps reached the study door. And then, at 12:41 a.m., the voice. Not the low recitation from before. This time clearly, beside the recorder, close to the microphone, barely a breath, and yet completely clear in the recording. 2 words. I am not going to tell you what the 2 words were. I have thought about this carefully. I have decided that the 2 words are the one part of this account I am keeping. Not because they were frightening. They were not frightening on the surface. They were ordinary words in ordinary language. I am keeping them because they were mine. Because they were specific to me and to my situation in a way that a residual haunting, a recording in the walls, a looped impression cannot account for. Because the 2 words were not random and were not generic. Because they were addressed to me specifically and because they were right. I broke my lease in December. Pete Garfield kept my deposit. I drove to my parents' house in Connecticut with my research materials and my recorder, and I did not go back for my furniture. I have a copy of every recording from that house on an external hard drive that I keep in a drawer and do not listen to. What I think happened in the Cresswell rental is this. The woman who died in the back bedroom died alone and was not found for somewhere between 2 weeks and a month. And in that time, something in her did not understand that it was done. And it has been in that house since, in the room where it ended. And it is still reciting whatever it was reciting at the end. A prayer, a name, a list of instructions for something that no longer needed instruction. And occasionally it comes out of the room and it listens to the person in the house, and it understands enough of what it hears to respond. 2 words: specific, addressed, correct. I have not played back the recording of those 2 words in 3 years. I know what she said. I understood exactly what she meant. That is the part that I cannot explain away, and that is the part I'm not going to explain to you, and that is the part that lives in the drawer with the hard drive and will be there when I am gone. Some things that end do not know they have ended. Some of them know your name.